Now, I've read a lot of books in 2019, and by that I mean a lot. But which ones have made it into my top 5 of the year? Let's find out. So I'll say now that this list is in no particular order. I'm not really entirely sure what my favourite book of the year was, but I do certainly know which 5 I found to be the most interesting, useful, or generally just best to read. So first in my randomly ordered top 5 list is Wayne Holloway's 2019 novel Bindle. Now this novel is split across 2 different narrative perspectives, and the interplay between both of them is something that makes this novel really interesting. The first narrative tells the tale of Frank, who is a US Marine Corps veteran, as he makes his way across America, travelling from LA to Detroit. But the thing is, it's not our everyday normal America. It's set in the future, and it is post-apocalyptic. The second narrative, which is interwoven with the first, tells the tale of a British film director as he tries to get his screenplay turned into an actual movie. But what is his screenplay? Well, it turns out that his screenplay is nothing other than Frank's story. Frank's story is doubly fictitious. Now, the novel is formally fascinating. It is part novel, part novelised screenplay, and part screenplay. By that I mean there are some parts of the novel that are literally a screenplay. All you have is dialogue and references to maybe what the camera is doing, or what it's zooming in on, or what's happening in the background, and so on. This formal experimentation made the novel really stand out for me. I've never seen anything like it, and it's a massive reason as to why I really, really enjoyed the novel. Now, when I finished reading it, I was left with one really important question in my mind. Which is more dystopian? The post-apocalyptic America of Frank's story, or is it the contemporary film industry? I'm not sure I've really come to a decision either way. Secondly, we have Johanna Sinisalo's novel The Core of the Sun, which was first published in Finland in 2013 and then translated in English in 2016. The novel details the life of a character called Vanna, and she lives in what is now known as the Eusistocratic Republic of Finland, which has used a combination of eugenics and social engineering to split womankind into 2 distinct groups. On one hand, you have the Eloi, the subspecies of women who are receptive, impressionable, and submissive, and are designed purely for sex and recreation. On the other hand, you have the Nuta women, also known as Morlocks, who are intelligent women who are sterilised and forced to complete manual labour. Vanna, it turns out, is secretly a Morlock posing as an Eloi. Vanna's sister, though, Manna, is actually an Eloi, and she goes missing. Vanna then also descends into the depths of drug addiction. Her stimulant of choice, though? Chili peppers. I know that sounds really silly, but it's written in an incredibly convincing way, and Sinisalo makes you really believe that chili peppers are, at least in this world, an incredibly dangerous substance. Sinisalo is known as the queen of the Finnish weird genre of fiction, but I don't know enough about that really, and I would more comfortably call this novel dystopian. Between each main chapter, there's a document of some sort, either a letter or a transcript or, I don't know, an extract from a magazine or something. And I find this really fascinating from a PhD perspective. Furthermore, the novel's treatment of drug misuse is really interesting, as is the way in which Sinisalo has treated the topic of gender in her novel, which has given her many favourable comparisons to Margaret Atwood. In fact, speaking of Atwood, we have, again, Margaret Atwood's The Testaments, which came out this year and is of course a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. It is set in the same oppressive regime as The Handmaid's Tale, but gives it much more depth and flavour. Told from 3 different perspectives, we see Gilead from a number of different angles that we necessarily didn't see it from in the original novel. I loved this book. Much like the other books on this list, the pages seemed to almost turn themselves, and I was absolutely lost in its words. That's what the best books do, in my opinion. They offer you complete escapism and make you forget that you're reading at all. Now, I did make a video when this book came out, and in it I said, I admit I was a bit sceptical when I saw that The Testaments was Booker shortlisted before it had even come out. And now, I can't think of anything more deserving of it. And it turns out I was partially correct, as Atwood did indeed win the Booker Prize for The Testaments, alongside Bernardine Evaristo for her novel Girl, Woman, Other. I know that the decision to have 2 winners for the Booker Prize was not particularly popular in publishing circles, or at least that's what my friends who work in the publishing industry tell me, but I do understand why The Testaments partially won the Booker. Simply put, it was the literary event of the year. I don't think I've seen as much hype around a single book being published since maybe the last Harry Potter book. It was more than just one book coming out. It was more like a cultural phenomenon. And because of that, I think I'd be foolish to leave it out of my top 5 books of the year. Next up on the list we have Yoko Ogawa's novel, The Memory Police. Now this book originally came out in 1994, but it was only translated in English this year, in 2019. The novel is absolutely beautifully written, and much like The Testaments was, it is the sort of book that seemed to turn its own pages. The novel is set on an unnamed island. In fact, many of the people and places in this novel remain unnamed, which adds this sense of mystery and intrigue to the overall piece. Anyway, on this island, things disappear, and when they disappear, they lose all meaning. Imagine waking up one day and the word bird had disappeared. You would be unable to hear birdsong, or it would seem weird to you. The idea of there being feathered, winged creatures is a concept that you can't really compute and understand. All items that recorded or depicted birds, such as a painting or a bird spotting book, or even a cuddly toy swan, they'd be things that you would have to get rid of. And if you didn't get rid of them, well then the memory police would come for you. But who wouldn't do that? Who wouldn't get rid of the things that now suddenly have no meaning to them? Well, it turns out that there are some people who don't forget. And it's those people who the memory police are on the lookout for. But who might not forget in the novel? Well, it's not our narrator, the young novelist. No, she forgets stuff as well. It's actually her editor, who goes by R, who doesn't forget things. When our narrator discovers that he doesn't forget stuff, she hides him in her house. As I've already said, this novel is beautifully written, and what fascinates me all the more is that within its pages we see contained the narrator's current novel in progress. This secondary novel is also incredibly beautiful and eerie and mildly unsettling. Still to this day, I'm trying to figure out the deeper connection between the two of them, and that's something that I think
really says a lot about this book.
I read it months ago, and still to this day I find myself thinking about that final conundrum. What is the deeper inner relationship between the two stories, the memory police and the narrator's work in progress novel? And finally, rounding up the list, we have Dorian Lynskey's The Ministry of Truth. Similarly to many of the books that appear on this list, it came out this year, so in 2019. However, what sets it apart from all of the others is that it is the only piece of non-fiction that I've included. Linsky's book is a biography of George Orwell's masterpiece of a novel, 1984. It traces Orwell's life and makes connections between the things that happened in his life that may have influenced his writing of the novel. It then also traces the novel's and Orwell's legacy after it was published and after he died, examining how it was received and interpreted at various points in history, including today's interesting political climate. So I've picked this book for various reasons. The first is sentimental, as it was a gift from a friend, and the message that my friend wrote inside the book was deeply meaningful for me and meant an awful lot. Secondly, given that this book deeply examines an incredibly important dystopian novel, I see this book as a symbol of my return to academia, the life change that really has defined my 2019. Finally, I thought that this book was incredibly well written. As I discussed in one of my PhD vlogs, academic writing was something that I found really hard to get back into. But upon reading Linsky's book, I found a model for the sort of writing that I wanted to replicate. His book is academic, yet accessible and engaging. It seamlessly weaves in examples and quotations, and it is structured in such a way that it keeps on inviting the reader to ask even more questions and promises that their answers will be given. This is how I think I want my own academic writing to be, and so I have to include this book in my list. Not only has it taught me an awful lot about a novel that is totally key to my PhD thesis, but it's also shown me how I could write my PhD thesis too. And now for some super quick honourable mentions. Sam Byers' 2018 novel Perfidious Albion projects a dystopian future of deceptive politicians, extreme prejudice, and technological super companies. Maybe it's not all that futuristic after all. John Lanchester's 2019 novel The Wall extrapolates the Brexit mindset and the global climate crisis in order to create a beautifully written novel full of suspense and mystery. Lanchester masterfully keeps the reader intrigued throughout his novel. Lingmar's 2018 novel Severance depicts a post-apocalyptic America after an illness, the Shen fever, wipes out most of the country. It tackles some interesting topics, including parenthood, duty, and what it means to belong to a community. George Orwell's 1949 classic, 1984, kind of had to be included in this list. It is, of course, an absolute dystopian masterpiece, and it's the only thing on this list that for me is a reread. Simply put, I've included it because of how important I know it is going to be to my PhD thesis. I've reread it once again and discovered so much more about it that I hadn't really considered before. If you're looking for a way to get into dystopian literature, give this a go. And finally, we have Lydia Yuknovich's 2017 novel, The Book of Joan. It's more sci-fi than straight-up dystopia, I think, but it is an absolutely fascinating reworking of the Joan of Arc tale, and treats text in a really interesting way. And so this book, and my thoughts on it, might find itself into my thesis somewhere. So there we go. Those were my top 5 books of 2019. But what is your favourite book that you've read this year? Please do let me know down in the comment section below. Cheers.